It was another week and another lawsuit filed against WWE and Vince McMahon. And this really is stemming from the Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon. They covered a lot of different topics. One of them was the ring boy scandal back in the early 90s, which is honestly, of all the scandals and all the things that WWE directly has been involved in, is just the worst of them all. And there's a lot of people who don't know about it. You know, there's a lot of people who were not wrestling fans back then or are too young to even know of it. It's not, obviously not something WWE is going to publicize. And maybe in the documentary, it was the first time that some of these people were even learning about it. But there was another lawsuit filed here, this time by the law firm DeCello Levitt, filing a suit against WWE, Vince McMahon, Linda McMahon, and TKO Group Holdings on behalf of 5 survivors of the Ring Boy scandal. And the lawsuit alleges that WWE was aware and did nothing to stop ring announcer and ring crew chief Mel Phillips' his sexual abuse of underage boys on the ring crew. It states that Phillips targeted children from broken homes and that assaults occurred not only at wrestling events but also in hotel rooms and other locations where Phillips would have the boys shuttled. What I want to do here, because I do think this is something that's worth covering, and I have talked about this on the podcast before, but this is something that, do I think it's going to lead to any direct repercussions for any of the parties involved? Probably not. No guarantee of that, but then again, you know, you have somebody like Rita Chatterton who accused Vince McMahon of rape, 35 plus years ago, and she walked away with a nice settlement because Vince just wanted to make her go away. This is right before the sale to Endeavor and the whole merger with WWE and UFC. So who knows what may end up coming out of it, and maybe it's been too long, but I do think it's something that's worth covering, and I want to read here from Dave Meltzer in this week's Wrestling Observer, and the reason I want to do that is because, Meltzer is someone who did cover this extensively at the time, and had direct conversations about it with Vince McMahon, who he used to speak to back then. Vince used to also have conversations with Wade Keller, who would talk about it in The Torch. Meltzer was even sitting right next to McMahon on the Phil Donahue show when this was all brought out on TV back in 1992. But I want to read to you from what he wrote, and I'll chime in with my thoughts along the way. After the Mr. McMahon documentary brought the subject of the 92 Ring Boy scandal back to the public, the law firms of DeCello, Levitt, and Murphy, Falcon and Murphy, filed a lawsuit on October 23rd, representing 5 unnamed plaintiffs who claimed they were sexually abused in the 1980s against Vince and Linda McMahon and TKO Holdings. The 81-page lawsuit asks for more than $30 million in damages, stating the 5 plaintiffs and other ring boys were sexually harassed and abused by employees of the WWF. In a press release, the firms claimed that the plaintiffs were underage boys hired by the late Mel Phillips, who was both a ring announcer at live events and headed the ring crew, and that Phillips sexually abused them. The suit claimed Phillips targeted children from broken homes and that he sexually assaulted them at arenas that WWF booked, and also in hotel rooms. The lawsuit claims the defendants, the McMahons and TKO, were fully aware of the systemic and pervasive abuse and did nothing to stop it. Now, let me stop there for a second. It is a little weird when you see TKO mentioned here. TKO is an entity that didn't even exist a couple of years ago. I'm assuming just for legal reasons as far as how and where the suit was filed. TKO is being mentioned, but obviously TKO did not exist back in the early 90s. I'm sure there's some legal reason for them being cited in that way here. The suit claimed an FBI investigation identified at least 10 ring boys abused by Phillips, although no charges were ever filed. Phillips passed away in 2012. The reason the case was reopened and filed in Maryland is because in 2023, the state passed the Child Victims Act, which eliminated the statute of limitations on child sex abuse lawsuits. The story first came out in early 1992 by Jeff Savage of the San Diego Union Tribune and later Phil Mushnick of the New York Post through interviews with Tom Cole and his brother Lee. Cole formerly worked for the ring crew and claimed that he was fired after he turned down sexual advances from former wrestler Terry Garvin, a WWF vice president of operations at the time, in Garvin's home when the rest of Garvin's family was not home. When the stories came out, before any names of abusers had been mentioned in any media stories, Vince McMahon announced that Garvin Phillips and Pat Patterson had all resigned out of loyalty to the company. McMahon also told us at the time that he had gotten rid of Phillips at one point over rumors, this was in 1988, he says, but brought him back 6 weeks later at the directive, or on the directive, that Phillips stay away from kids. The lawsuit claimed that Phillips did not stay away from kids. Yeah, no shit. I mean, that always works with a pedophile. Hey, yeah, look, we'll bring you back. Just pinky swear. You're going to stay away from kids. Oh, okay. Sure thing. The lawsuit claimed Phillips did not stay away from kids, but the company knew it, and that some of the 5 defendants who were not named were abused after 1988. McMahon at the time also said that Patterson was innocent, and when asked why he was gone, said that Patterson resigned due to a gay witch hunt and out of extreme loyalty to the company. He insisted that Patterson would never be back. Many believed that Patterson was never gone, although at the time Patterson was attending bartending school and was looking for a new profession. McMahon secretly settled with Cole days before the infamous Donahue episode that McMahon was on, along with myself, Bruno Sammartino, superstar Billy Graham, Barry Orton, the uncle of Randy Orton, former wrestler Tom Hankins, former announcer Murray Hodgson, and talk show host John Arezzi. After settling with Cole and hiring him back, part of the settlement was that Patterson, Garvin, and Phillips would never work for the company again. Months later, the McMahons asked Cole if it was okay to bring Patterson back, and he agreed. Patterson, who was the co-booker of the company for years with McMahon, remained affiliated with the company until his death. Cole committed suicide shortly after Patterson's death. His brother Lee claimed that Tom was haunted by how lionized Patterson was by those in wrestling after his death. Within wrestling at the time, many people in WWF believed that Patterson had done nothing wrong, but nobody defended Garvin or Phillips. Although on the Mr. McMahon documentary, Tony Atlas claimed that Patterson grabbed his pecker and when asked why he didn't complain to McMahon, started laughing about it and telling the interviewers that they didn't understand wrestling and that if he would complain, he would be the one who would be fired. Friends of Patterson have always vehemently defended him. Vince McMahon's attorney, Jessica Taub Rosenberg, released a statement saying more than 30 years ago, the columnist Phil Mushnick tried to make headlines with these same false claims. Those allegations were never proven and ultimately became the subject of a defamation lawsuit against Mr. Mushnick. The negligence claims against Mr. McMahon that were asserted today rely on these same absurd, defamatory, and utterly meritless statements by Mr. Mushnick. We will vigorously defend Mr. McMahon, and we are confident the court will find that these claims are untrue and unfounded. Notice how she puts all the blame on Phil Mushnick for this. Like he just made everything up, and there aren't people coming forward making these claims about what happened to them. I guess Phil Mushnick must have put them all up to it. Look, I don't like Mushnick. Okay, I think he's a holier-than-thou pompous jackass. I've never liked him. I don't like, everything he writes about. It's just he has a problem with everything. He's always written that. Whether it's about wrestling, whether it's about baseball, basketball, if you ever come across his columns in the New York Post, he's just a miserable prick. Okay? So I never liked the guy to begin with. But they have always hated Mushnick because he brought to light something that they didn't want brought to light. Because the mainstream media did not care about wrestling or that people were being abused. Because it was silly pro wrestling, right? A lot of the stuff fell under the radar. They didn't take it seriously. And that's just the way they liked it. Mushnick drew attention to something that they did not want any attention on, and it drove them nuts, and they hated him for it, instead of addressing the problems within their own company, or at least waiting too long to do so. That's really what that's all about. The lawsuit quoted an unnamed WWE executive in a Business Insider story as saying, "The boys that the company hired to put up the rings and so forth were being abused by some of the folks who were in the wrestling operations side of things. And it was just generally known by everybody that it was going on. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. The McMahons clearly knew what was going on, but really did nothing to stop it. There was not a damn thing that we could do about it." That's bullshit. Okay, I read that comment and I got angry. Okay, that is a bullshit statement. And I have no sympathy for anyone who worked there at the time, knew what was going on or suspected that something was going on and chose not to say anything about it, especially if it was involving kids. We're talking about kids here. I mean, any abuse is terrible, but we're talking about kids. Kids, in some cases, from broken homes who were vulnerable. They preyed on them because they were easy targets. So if you worked for the company, I don't care if you were a talent, an employee, another ring crew employee, a janitor who was around this stuff. If you were there and you knew this was going on and you could have said something about it and you didn't, even anonymously, right? Go to a fucking payphone or something and call somebody who you think could get the story out, even if you don't want to put your name to it because you feared for your job or you feared retribution in some way. If you knew and you didn't say anything about it, you are an asshole. Plain and simple. I don't want to hear this, oh, I couldn't say anything. Yes, you could have. And sure, yes, you might have lost your job, but that's not an excuse to keep quiet about something like this. Your hands weren't tied. You didn't have tape over your mouth. You're not a victim here. I don't want to hear this garbage. Oh, there was nothing we could do about it. Fuck out of here with that nonsense. That's how you justify it so you can sleep better at night. Meltzer says, the lawsuit claimed Phillips in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. As ring crew chief, hired boys as young as 12 and 13 years old to work the ring crew. They used the quote that McMahon gave Mushnick in 1992 on the story that he had once let Phillips go because he had a peculiar and unnatural interest in young boys. And as I mentioned before, he then brought him back 6 weeks later with the caveat that you have to stay away from kids. This is, again, I don't know how many people truly understand how depraved this all is or that any of this even happened. And they allowed it to happen. They allowed it to go on. I guess he was such an important asset to this company despite everything they knew about him. Even if you are the most cynical person in the world, just look at it from a public relations perspective. Why the fuck would you bring back somebody like that? Suit claimed that WWE allowed Phillips to exploit his position to groom and abuse ring boys in plain sight of wrestlers and executives in the locker room. The suit noted that in some venues, the defendants provided Phillips with a private dressing room where he would use his own expensive video camera, which was rare at the time, to film sexual escapades with the children. The suit claimed 5 former ring boys have come forward and believe this is only the tip of the iceberg and that more are expected to come forward with the suit being filed. It noted the FBI received a videotape shot by a WWF employee and that the tape was in possession of the WWF before it was sent to the FBI. Now, this is true. Again, something else people may not know. The FBI got possession of a videotape showing Mel Phillips fondling the feet of these underage boys and rubbing them in his crotch area. Now, there were FBI memos saying that the tape provided little evidentiary value because it was taken in a public setting and it contained no obvious sexual activity. And too many explanations could be offered by Phillips for what was seen on the tape. Basically, if you read between the lines here, in 1993, when they saw this tape, the FBI didn't think this man playing with little boys' feet and pulling their toes apart until they screamed and rubbing them against his crotch was evidence of abuse of a sexual nature. They might have a different opinion on that if they got a tape like that today. But back then, this was not evidence to them of any abuse. The lawsuit says that in addition to the federal government's explicit knowledge, it was common knowledge in the WWF, along with the ring crew wrestlers and executives, that Phillips surrounded himself with a posse of underage ring boys, including when he traveled across state lines and stayed in hotel rooms with the children. It was also well known throughout the WWF that Phillips had sexual fetishes for young boys because Phillips did not try to hide his recruiting and activities with underage boys, including exhibiting his foot fetish for young boys in front of WWF personnel. It was there for the WWF and its leaders to see in plain sight, yet no one did anything to stop his rampant and open abuse of young boys. An FBI behavioral science unit report noted that Phillips' sexual abuse was widespread, confirming 10 different victims. The report stated although his activity with boys' feet is most likely sexual behavior, the material furnished does not provide conclusive evidence of this fact. The lawsuit stated that in a 1993 interview, Linda McMahon said that Phillips had a foot fetish and that it had become a running joke in the WWF, but then claimed that it was being blown out of proportion. The suit claimed that Phillips would get completely naked and require the young boys to be naked for extended periods of time, including throughout the night, when they would be coerced to share a bed with Phillips. Phillips would sometimes videotape the assaults. Nelson Swegler, who produced television for WWF at the time, said in the book Sex, Lies, and Headlocks that he remembers walking into a bus and seeing Garvin hard at it with a ring boy. Everyone knew what was going on, he said, but it would have taken someone within the Brotherhood to have moved on it, and none of the people who knew about it moved on it. It noted a 1992 quote from Sammartino saying that Phillips was once spotted in the backseat of a car in Pennsylvania performing a sexual act on an 11-year-old boy, and that Vince and his father were told about it and did nothing. On the Larry King show, Sammartino said that everybody knew about Phillips. McMahon was on that show, and Phil Donahue as well, on his show, and indignantly asked, why didn't anyone call the authorities? Which is a fair question. There are no heroes in this story. Vince McMahon is not the only villain in this story here, I'm sorry to say. The lawsuit also had quotes from various interviews with Jake Roberts, Sid Vicious, Greg Valentine, Sabu, Shane Douglas, Honky Tonk Man, Brickhouse Brown, Tito Santana, and Bret Hart regarding the actions of Phillips, as well as a comment by Gorilla Monsoon during a match where he said, as Mel Phillips would say, that match will knock your socks off. Bret Hart, in his autobiography, noted an incident with Phillips that he said became known to Vince McMahon, Pat Patterson, and other wrestlers. Hart also described that in Calgary, Vince, Patterson, Howard Finkel, Garvin, and Phillips were trying to scare Phillips by teasing him that Stu Hart wanted to stretch him in the dungeon. But Bret said that his father knew they were just trying to make fun of Phillips, so first he wouldn't do it. But he said Vince and Patterson convinced Stu to do it eventually, and they were all in the kitchen and could hear Phillips screaming. And finally here, the lawsuit noted a 1999 suit filed by Scott Hopkins against Titan Sports, WWF, and Phillips for injuries caused to him as a result of the defendant Mel Phillips' abuse of the plaintiff when he was a minor. In the complaint, he said that in 1986 and 87, he would share a room with Phillips. He said that Phillips multiple times rubbed his genitals and that Titan Sports facilitated this by providing Phillips with a private dressing room. It was believed that the case was settled out of court. Hopkins was asked by Business Insider about the suit and would not talk, citing a confidentiality agreement in the settlement. So this is one of those stories, you read about this, you hear, and this story has generally been out there for decades now. And then you read a lawsuit like this and you read a little bit deeper and you look at the FBI memos and you look at testimony, and when you really dig deep into this, and I could understand some people not wanting to because it's fucking disgusting, but it really illustrates how prevalent this was at the time. But I think the thing that really is just completely inexcusable is just the idea that this was going on. Okay, this stuff was going on, and not just with Mel Phillips, but this stuff was going on there for years, and people knew about it, and they did nothing to stop it. Yeah, it's one thing to say, oh, this guy's evil, this guy's an asshole, oh my God, look at what he did or what he's alleged to have done. But, the way I look at it, when you have people who are in positions of power who could have put a stop to this, who were made aware of this, and they did nothing to stop it, they're as guilty as anybody. And as I said before, anybody who had knowledge of this or suspected something was going on, or they'd be walking down the hallway and they would see or hear something that just didn't seem right and didn't bring it to anybody's attention, or they laughed about it. It was a running joke. Is that what Linda McMahon said? It was a running joke that this guy had a foot fetish. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? I don't know that anything is going to come out of the lawsuit, but good on them. If they have a story to tell, And again, there's no statute of limitations in the state where they filed this lawsuit. I mean, again, to go back to the Rita Chatterton thing, there was a very brief window that opened, I think, in the state of New York that allowed victims, alleged victims of sex abuse, to file suit, which is why, in the end, she ended up getting paid off and probably can't talk about it either. I'm sure she has a confidentiality agreement that she's bound to. I don't think there should be a statute of limitations, frankly, on this kind of stuff. I think it's ridiculous that there is in the first place. But we'll see if it goes anywhere. I mean, we know Vince McMahon has more money than God with all that stock he cashed out, so it's not a matter of hurting him financially, but it's a matter of, you know, making people aware of the fact that, hey, this is the sort of thing that was going on back then, and somebody, even all these years later, needs to be held accountable for it.